If we can prove that the removal of trawler pressure itself results in a rewilding and a regeneration and a recovery of things like fisheries, then it's an argument for doing it everywhere.
Kelp forests are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. Its seaweeds also help purify water, prevent coastal erosion, and could store vast amounts of carbon.
These magical aquatic habitats once stretched right across this area, but there's only 4% of them left now, mainly due to bottom trawler fishing. So I've come to the Sussex shorelines here to find out how a significant shift in policy has given teams of scientists the opportunity to bring back the kelp.
Historically, this used to have extensive kelp beds along the Sussex coast. So all the way from where we are here in Shoreham, you'd see them all the way up to Selsey. And these were extremely important breeding grounds for the fish. They play important roles in carbon, locking up carbon because they're plants or they're algae. They played important roles in storm mitigation, you know, so when you get waves, they would actually take out the energy and so forth. But in 1987, there was a very, very big storm. And that storm resulted, I think, in some damage to those kelp beds. And subsequently, the theory is, and the information seems to be, that the trawling activity could come into those areas. Before, you couldn't risk catching a trawling gear in those, which is dragging basically a net and some metal rollers across the bottom.
So there was too much kelp?
There wasn't too much kelp. There was a perfect amount of kelp.
Too much kelp for the trawlers, though?
Well, too much kelp for the trawlers. Yeah, the kelp basically played a role in keeping out the trawling activity from the coastal zone.
3 years ago, the Sussex Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority launched an ambitious plan to restore these vital habitats. As a result of awareness campaigns, the plan gained the support of the local community, and finally, a bylaw was passed to create a 4-kilometre wide trawler exclusion zone along a section of the UK's southern coastline.
So now basically we have a 300 square kilometre effectively marine conservation zone to a degree. And it took a lot of citizens raising the effort, a lot of NGOs kicking in and creating pressure really to finally get this law instated, to try and stop the trawling action.
These developments mobilised universities and conservation organisations to form the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project.
So, Mika, the bylaws came in March. What happened then? This has been a critical summer for you guys, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the scientists have come in really after they've done the political work and all that stuff. And good, that's the toughest job done, I think, to a certain degree. But for the science now, what we need to do is get a baseline. We need to know what's the situation underwater like now. And that's the only way we're going to be able to follow what happens and see what the recovery trajectory is even, or how fast it recovers, or if it does recover.
Dr. Mika Peck leads a team at the University of Sussex.
Yeah, here we have a map of the south coast, and you can see the pink area, which is kind of interest, is the new bylaw area. So that's the trawler ban area. And it goes out 4 kilometres here and goes down to about 1 kilometre and less, and all the way up to Rye. What it shows that each of these red dots is where we've dropped one of these beautiful bruvs.
Okay. Scientific term, I assume?
Scientific term is bruv.
Okay.
It's baited remote underwater video.
Okay.
In fact, this is baited with standard bait, which is often as a mackerel. And you have 2 cameras here. You've got a GoPro on both sides here to give you a stereo image. So the idea is we can then work out size of things that come into field of view. So we had 28 spots in the Sussex area, and 3 of these at each of those spots, 150 metres apart. And what you do is we drop these things into the bottom of the sea.
And then all the data from these GoPros comes back to the labs here.
Yeah.
And that's where these guys come in.
It is a manual process to get a species list.
Can we have a look at maybe some of the footage that's being trawled through?
Yeah, let's have a look.
So what we're looking at right now is a spiny spider crab trying to attack the bait, so the mackerel.
At this stage, anything we're seeing now is stuff that would have existed before this protection zone was created. Oh, wow, look at that, there's a ray.
Yeah. They would have been there, but they would have been quickly picked up by the trawlers.
Okay. And Valentina, what have we got up here on the screen?
So once we finish all the data analysis, this is pretty much what it looks like.
So we like to see what kind of species we have in the different habitats, but we do have some areas that have some algal coverage, and we see how there's much higher number of species found compared to grounds where we have nothing left when it's just rocks. And rocks is literally what we find the most. So in areas where we only have rocks, our species diversity is just so low.
With the combination of COVID and the fact that you've had the trawling ban, is there any indication of kind of upward curve of particular species or anything yet, or is that just too early?
It's too early to say. Nature is very resilient, which is great, which is what we love to see, but it does take a little bit of time. It's scary to see what we found. So the fact that there is so little left, it doesn't surprise me very much, and that's just because how destructive trawling is. When it comes around, it just drags everything along the bottom. So am I surprised? Probably not.
Okay, look, so there's obviously a long road ahead here, Mika, but what information can you tell us? What findings have you made so far?
I suppose what we can say is, there's very little kelp within the areas we've dropped these, so desperately a need for that to regenerate.
Even less than you'd imagined?
Yeah, much less than
Really?
I imagined. It's been quite heartbreaking. There are some pockets of hope. Some of the places. We've also seen that it is a degraded ecosystem. The species we tend to see here is that we'll have middle predator dominance.
The loss of nursery habitats has resulted in the disappearance of apex predators such as sharks, dolphins and sea lions, allowing the middle predators such as eels and cat sharks free rein to pick away the remains and therefore cause further disruption.
Does nature need your help?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Does nature need our help? Well, that's what we're going to kind of follow. I mean, the rewilding concept is, in this case, is kind of a bottom-up one. What's missing here is that key habitat structure that kelp provides. And if that can naturally come in and do it, away it goes. Let's see what happens. But there could be a situation where there's been so damaged that you've had a thing called a phase shift. If our monitoring programs show that things aren't happening or there's a phase shift, then we can actively restore. We can potentially put stuff in there that would help kelp grow.
Anticipating the potential need for active restoration, Dr. Peck and his South Coast colleagues have been collaborating with world-leading underwater rewilding specialists, including the Scottish Association for Marine Science and the Zoological Society of London, or ZSL.
So we're just walking down to the New Dawn, which is the ship we'll be going out on today, the vessel. Hey, how are you? How are you doing?
Good.
Good to see you. What have you got in store for us today?
What we're really looking for is what kelp exists today here on the Sussex coast. There's something like 96% has gone, and we're searching for that 4% and where it lies. So what we've got with us today, we've got the Honourable Dr. Chris Yessen from ZSL here. He's our population genetics guy. And then behind us, I couldn't miss out on the old Dr. Valentina Scarponi there. Yeah.
I was asked if I had my diving certificate. Thankfully, no, looking at the colour of that.
So this is our destination today, yeah. This is the Indiana. It went down in 1901, is that right?
It's all broken up wreck, so it's become a reef.
Okay, so we're going out to sea. About a mile out, we're told that shipwreck is often where the kelp is able to grow naturally quite well. So out to sea we go.
To devise an effective restoration plan, it's essential to gain a clear picture of how much kelp remains and how it corresponds genetically with surrounding areas.
Are we in the protected zone? I keep calling it protected zone. It's not actually a protected zone yet, is it?
The trawler bylaw area.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking quiet out here today, apart from the odd sailing boat. What about the trawlers? Would you normally see them out here?
I used to see them. I live right on the beach over there, and I would see them coming up within a couple of hundred metres of the shore before the ban. So yes, you get the activity here.
Yeah, okay. And now, totally gone?
So far, so good, it seems. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I think the high profile of the Kelp project has meant that people report all sorts of boats to the inshore fisheries and conservation who aren't actually trawlers. Yep. So there's quite a lot of eyes now out there looking on this, which is wonderful to see.
Okay, yeah.
The visibility could be pretty bad.
Okay.
What we're thinking of doing is actually using the shot weight, tie a line to it and go out on a line from the shot weight as a buddy pair. Wait for it. See that line's clear? Yep, clear.
So 10 metres below us is the Indiana, the wreck, that should have some kelp around it. And the divers are just kitting up now. Well, firstly, you're going to hope it to stay dry when you're in there, right? 16 degrees, though, that's not that bad.
It's not that bad, no. A couple of months ago, I was diving in 5-degree water, so it's
balmy by comparison.
Yes, the plan is to go and try to collect some kelp samples. I'm working on this project to look at the population genetics of kelp. So how related are the individuals that we see in this location to other locations around the south coast? If we understand which genetic populations these are from, then we know that we're not, potentially introducing things that don't really belong or can thrive here. There's reports of some kelp growing on the wreck. Wrecks can be really good places for kelp. They provide an attachment. They need something hard. Also, the wrecks are kind of a natural barrier to things like trawling, because fishermen don't want to trawl across a wreck because their nets will get caught up.
Valentina, can I ask you what happens when you get down there? Are you doing something different from the rest of the team here? Or
No, I think we're going to split up just to have a better chance of finding some kelp, because since there isn't much left, so one team is going to go one direction and then the other team is going to go the other direction, and hopefully we'll both find some kelp. Why aren't you coming with us, actually?
Well, look, just in case something goes wrong, I can drag you out.
Yeah. Well, we do have like an electric pulley now that we can use in case.
So I'm not even useful for that.
Not even useful for that. No.
Mickey, you've done so many of these dives now. Do you still get any sense of nerves before you jump in that water?
For me, it's a new site. So, yeah, you've got to be, I think, a little bit wary. So every dive in the winter, more rugged conditions, we don't quite know what it's going to be like.
Well, good luck, guys. I'll be up here, nice and warm.
It may be not the most picturesque of dives, but who knows? If all goes to plan, one day we may see a very different underwater environment.
So I mean, when you're going down to a site like this, presumably there's a chance you don't find what you're looking for if there's only 4% left.
Yeah, 100%. There's also a chance that we'll go down, not find anything, but it's not because it's not there, it's just because we don't find it.
With the uncertainty of finding any of the sparse remaining kelp, this data will be supported by the recording of something called eDNA.
Let's go and find out what's going on over here. Oh, apart from catching some fish. So that's what Neville does while he's got 45 minutes to kill while they're down there.
So I'm going to be looking at eDNA, which is environmental DNA.
And sorry to ask a very basic question, but environmental DNA, what does that actually mean?
So environmental DNA is essentially DNA found in the environment. So when marine species are shedding skin cells, scales, and so when we sample some of the water, we pass the water through a filter, which captures the DNA, and we send this filter off to the lab, and they'll report back to us with all the species that they found.
Okay, so it gives you some indication as to the level of biodiversity down there.
Exactly, yeah.
So what do you actually do? Maybe you can...
Yeah, so we're trying to let it down about 10 meters, because that's the depth that we're at.
So you wait until it hits the bottom?
No, just above the bottom.
The study of environmental DNA is a relatively new science. The University of Sussex is joining forces with UK-based company Nature Metrics, using DNA monitoring technology to get a better understanding of the environment's remaining biodiversity.
So now we've collected the water.
In there is valuable data.
Lots of data, yeah, exactly. So we're literally just passing the water straight through the filter.
And any sense of what samples you're likely to find in there?
Probably mackerel, as we've just seen. We caught a few. And other fish, hopefully some signs of seaweed and kelp.
And so the idea, the hope, is that as time goes on, more and more variety.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess there's no way of telling how much is down there from this. It's just the variety.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
The filter is then sent back for analysis. In addition to the data collected by the dive team and the remote underwater videos, this information will help complete a picture of vital baseline data.
Why did you want to become involved in this particular project?
I just think it's a great opportunity, this new trawling ban, to see the effects that trawling has really had on biodiversity and whether this can be reversed. We seem to forget how diverse it is down there because we can't really see it unless we go diving.
Okay, so they're coming out of the water. And let's find out what samples they may or may not have. Have they found the kelp?
We did.
You did find the kelp?
We did.
Fantastic.
Visibility was absolutely awful.
You found
Did you say absolutely awful?
Okay.
I mean, it's certainly, I mean, I'm not a super experienced diver, but those were the worst conditions that I've ever experienced as a diver. I mean, it was a point where if you couldn't touch the seabed, you couldn't see the seabed. And that's really, really difficult. I mean, for trying to scan for kelp in those conditions, you've got to be incredibly lucky.
There was a bit of a current down there.
It was current, visibility is really bad. Every 2 seconds I was like turning around, making sure that Mika was there. It's actually quite hard to work underwater with such thick gloves, but otherwise my hands would just get completely frosted. And this is what it looks like. So.
And this is kelp that was here, this is the last remaining remnants? This isn't young kelp that's just growing now?
Well, if these are the annual, as if we think that they are, then they are growing every year from new.
Okay.
So we haven't, it's quite harder to find the Papaberea species, the one that kind of creates the more long-lasting forests, as if we like to call them. So that's why we do the genetics, so that we can figure it out which one it is.
So it was kelp, but not the kelp you were expecting to see?
No, I'm still delighted it's kelp. There are lots of different, there are quite a few different species of kelp. Some are more, I suppose, important as habitat builders. This is intermediary, because it looks like those kelp with a hand, but then it has this, it's not as long-term as some of the other forest kelp. So I'm not upset with it, it's doing a great job.
The characteristics of the substrate is something that we were wondering about. Is the kelp going to be able to come back now that the substrate is what it is? But if there is some species, it means that perhaps even the species that we do want to will manage to get back because the substrate is good enough.
How was that, guys?
That's pretty difficult.
Yeah? Visibility was poor, I hear.
It was poor.
Okay.
The current by the end was absolutely raging.
Can I, guys, just have a quick chat with you about the bigger picture stuff here? There's presumably many different things you could be doing, and yet you're choosing to do this.
I guess sort of like as cold and as wet as it seems, this is kind of like the enjoyable stuff. Like this is the payoff for the hard work you do in the uni and at your desk and all that kind of stuff. You get the opportunity to come out and do these types of things. And yeah, the reason the project is so important is because it's about trying to restore some of that natural habitat. So we have, for example, nursery populations which will grow, and that will spill over into nearshore habitats, sequestering carbon, protection from extreme weather. Like we really need these natural environments to, for resources, and even just really when you think about it from a personal perspective. The joy of like being able to come out and like enjoy the kelp forest and look at the environment and look at the biodiversity, I think it's really important.
At some point, farmers used to come down to the beach at Shoreham and collect it and use it as fertiliser. And then they got, I think the local council was planning of charging them. So there was, the perceptions changed completely when we've realised that kelp was critical for the whole ecosystem. And the other people that are engaged are the sort of inshore fishermen, and they're very excited about this because it gives them a chance to access, healthy fish stocks and create a small economy around local fishing. So yeah, there'll be lots of winners from this.
I think passion is what drives all of us, most of us, because it's not that much of a glamorous, environment. You saw us coming up, we're like all wet and cold, we're like snot coming down our faces. So it's the desire of seeing a healthier ecosystem, which for me is where beauty lays in.
All right, let's talk samples, guys. You found something.
I think we've got 3 different samples.
Okay.
One of them's definitely fur bellows, which is digitata.
Digitata.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's a lot more leathery, that one.
All in all, satisfied with the day's findings?
I think this is a much bigger haul. Certainly you guys did a lot better than we did.
Yeah, we did find quite a lot, which was quite great.
I've only got 2 fur bellow samples before today.
Perfect.
So this is actually a big win for me going forward.
In addition to the data needed for possible restoration, Chris will take these samples back to ZSL to study the population genetics, to try and understand where the original kelp spores came from, in order to find out if there are other important kelp habitats that need to be protected. blue carbon is something we are hearing more and more about, and refers to carbon storing coastal and marine ecosystems, such as seagrass and kelp forests. Dr. Ray Ward from Brighton University is a specialist in blue carbon research.
Our blue carbon systems, until about 15 years ago, were not that well studied as an important area for locking away carbon. But in recent years, we've realised that the rates of carbon sequestration are substantially higher than that of tropical forests, boreal forests, grasslands. So, and that for us sort of shows that it has vital importance as a store and as an area for sort of continued locking away of carbon. So today we're going to be taking some cores from the submarine environment so that we can have a look to see how much carbon is actually stored in the sediments in the submarine environment. What we want to know is what are the principal sources of the carbon that's stored here. So is it predominantly kelp, and was it predominantly kelp when we last had kelp here? Or is it fairly rapidly resuspended, and in actual fact the bulk of the carbon comes from terrestrial sources? We don't know that in this area, so it's really going to be of importance to us. So let's go and get kitted up and we'll get in the water.
Great, cool, I'll take your lead.
What we'll be doing is we'll basically be putting this in place. Now, there are coring devices that you can use to drop it off the boat and it will go down. But with this, I know whether, when I'm actually taking the core, whether there's subsurface compaction so that I can actually date those.
Now, I'm sure that this varies on different compactness of the soil, but how many years of sample do you have in here?
Probably about 100 years worth of sediment.
And that would be 100 years ago, the whole coastline would have been covered in kelp.
Yeah. So the last time that we had a huge amount of kelp in this area was in the 80s. That was when we had the large-scale die-off and loss of our sort of principal macroalgae. So that means that we'll be able to pick it up because we're talking about sort of 40 years ago with that. We're actually going to be looking here as the first of a series along a transect, which is a line along a gradient out to sea. So we'll be going, the deepest we'll probably go down to about 60 metres, and we'll be taking cores out there.
Ray predicts that due to tidal activity, these near-shore readings will deliver a disturbed record of the sediment, and it'll be the deeper samples that provide that crucial knowledge as to the effectiveness of what is being called kelp carbon conveyor.
That was quite quick, actually. You got a sample?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it runs to probably, don't know if you can just about see it. Below that, actually, we hit the chalk reef. So I kind of thought this was going to be a fairly shallow core, this one. Now the next ones we'll take will probably be about half a kilometre off.
How many years is it going to take until you've got a meaningful amount of data to be able to say, yes, this is valuable carbon capture?
So what we've got here, we've got a project that's going to last for 4 years to do an evaluation of the carbon, and that will be collecting a series of cores, analysing all the cores, as well as measuring how much carbon is actually locked up in the biomass of the kelp itself.
With taped up sample in hand, it's time for the sediment analysis back at Brighton University.
Right, there you go, 2 halves.
It's first dried, cut into time-specific sections and placed into separate beakers.
Okay, once we've dried them, we will then put them in the laser particle size analyzer that we have here, and then we'll be able to see if there are any major changes in sediment particle size, because we've found that sediment particle size can actually have an impact on how much carbon is stored.
So obviously this is important work, but it is only one kelp forest in one tiny little patch of our planet Earth. What are the implications though? If you get this right, how important could this be for the bigger picture, the fight against climate change?
We've got a good idea of how much carbon is locked away in our seagrasses, in our salt marshes and in our mangrove forests. Yeah, and that is helping to protect those areas. Okay, we don't know for kelp. We don't know where to protect, and we really do need to. In the fight against climate change, we really need to use a multi-pronged approach. We need to cut down on the amount of meat that we're eating. We need to reduce the amount of petrochemicals that we're burning. We also need to protect those habitats that are locking away our carbon, whether it's our forests or our coastal systems.
So what's at stake here is really, actually it's quite big. I mean, this is a small experimental area, and it sounds big at 300 square kilometres, but if we can prove that the removal of trawler pressure itself results in a rewilding and a regeneration and a recovery of things like fisheries, for local fisheries and so forth, then it's an argument for doing it everywhere.
So years of hard work ahead of you. At the end of it, who's going to listen?
Hopefully everybody. It is a way for us to show the benefit for the long term and then to get everybody to listen. And then from the public, we can get government to listen. And once government listen, then we can really make changes for the long term.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and hit the bell button below for notifications. We'll see you next time.